Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sunset TV. I'm Tina Jha, you're watching Perspective. There is need to intensify efforts to bring more higher education institutes in the country under the formal accreditation system, and all universities and colleges must be scored on how foolproof their examinations are. The Parliamentary Standing Committee on Education, Women, Children, Youth and Sports has recommended that the government give an active consideration to the demand that deemed universities be allowed to use the term university by amending Clause 23 of the UGC Act 1956. The report added that several state universities regularly fail to carry out assessments smoothly, often reporting instances like question paper leaks and also rampant cases of copying. So for this, the panel suggested that the parameter of the institution's exam management competency should also be considered as a mandatory norm towards consideration of accreditation. Besides, it also noted that there is an urgent need to revisit and revamp the norms for starting online classes. A host of other observations and recommendations were also made related to research and academic environment in higher education institutions. So we'll talk about some key points of the Parliamentary Panel report on the program today with four eminent panelists who are joining us on the program. So let me first introduce them to you. Pleased to welcome Dr. C.B. Sharma, former Chairman NIOS, Professor of Education, IGNOU. Thank you, Dr. Sharma, for your time. Major Harsh Kumar, Joint Registrar, University of Allahabad. He is also the former Secretary of NCERT. Welcome to Sunset TV, Major Kumar. Dr. Preeti Bajaj, Vice Chancellor, Gilgotias University, Greater Noida. Dr. Bajaj, welcome to Sunset TV. And Professor Dinesh Prasad Saklani, Director, NCERT. Professor Saklani, thank you for your time. Glad to have you on the program. So let me begin the program by getting the first comments from Dr. Bajaj on, what the parliamentary panel has observed and recommended as far as reforms in the higher education sector in the country are concerned.
It's a very, very exhaustive 49 pages report, which I have gone through, and very good observations. My only, I would say it's one of the good, report which I have read for the private and public, but then only few challenges which I am facing. At the one side, we are talking about reforms in the examination, and other side, we have recommended that the exams should be very, very focused, and there should not be, any case which should be reported. Wherein, if I will target that there should be examination should be very, very fair, and nobody should report even whatever malpractices have gone. Then probably people will not put it on paper, and still the system would be there. In fact, the universities which are putting a paper and they are coming up with, fair system, they are documenting that. It means they are promoting fairness in the examination and academic integrity. They are giving weightage for that. The second is, we talked about the report, all is good, but when many a times we are just talking about reports, 80% contribution is by private sector. Everywhere it is being highlighted. So 80% grants, 80% weightage and focus has to be to the private institution, which probably most of the time we neglect. 20% government institutions are in the country and probably taking 80% of the grants which are available with most of the agencies.
Absolutely. So the private sector is contributing in a huge way when it comes to higher education in the country, but the kind of financial support and incentives that you would expect is somewhere lacking. So the report, of course, talks about that, and I'll come back to you to understand what the current situation is, and if these recommendations are actually put into effect, what difference is it going to make. But let me go across to Major Kumar and get his views on some of the key reforms, including the most important one, Dr. Kumar, about the committee recommending that the government give an active consideration to the demand that deemed universities be allowed to use the term university. And this, of course, would mean that an amendment would be required in Clause 23 of the UGC Act 1956. How significant is this recommendation by the parliamentary panel?
जैसे मैडम ने कहा कि 80% of the resources being taken by the 20% of the government institutes, I partly agree and partly do not, because then these are the universities who are providing the education to the most common students of far-flung places in the country, which private universities does not provide. In fact, they have to come forward on this. And definitely, this is a very good initiative from the government on this regard, because see, what we have started with the national education policy is inclusive education, and for inclusive education and to integrate ICT in teaching and learning. So this facility has to be provided to all the students. And let me tell you, this is a very apt question which is being asked right now, because we are going.
There seems to be a technical connection with Major Harsh Kumar that we are facing. We'll try and reconnect with him. But in the meanwhile, let me go across to Professor Sharma. And that same question on the deemed university. What changes, Professor Sharma, if the deemed universities are actually allowed to use, in fact, remove the prefix and use the term university?
There is no country in the world which has a nomenclature as deemed university. What do you mean by a deemed university? A university is a university is a university. We have 1,000 years history of university, and we have well defined what is a university. When we start defining a university as a deemed, because we had to give the status to the Indian Institute of Science and Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, the status of a university, we coined a new term as deemed university. You messed up with it. I believe the National Education Policy 2020 tries to rectify the large number of such mistakes that we made in higher education. A university has to be a university. It has to be multidisciplinary. A graduate will be a graduate of the nation. What I believe is, it's well placed to do away with the nomenclature deemed university and bring all universities at par. But read chapter 18 of the policy. It says we'll have a new structure in place of University Grants Commission. Again, University Grants Commission was a misconception. It was only an agency created to grant universities the fund that was available to us, and that was denied to private universities. Well, Professor Bajaj is pleading for more finances to private universities. The private universities came up with the whole concept that they would be self-financed, they would be, in a sense, profit-making. Why should the public money be given to them when they have differential fee structure? So what I would say is, we will have to go back and look at the whole structure of university, the definition of, it's an old concept of the idea of a university. Let us stick to that, and the chapter 18, which says that the University Grants Commission will be named as Higher Education Commission of India, and we will stick to standard definitions and procedures. Because again, look at chapter 19 of the policy, which says every institution will have a board of governors, which is very appropriately placed. Why should the administration of a university be made or done by somebody outside the institution?
Okay.
Several
important points made by Dr. Sharma. I'll come back to Dr. Preeti Bajaj to get responses on each one of that, and particularly on the private institutions supposedly being self-financed, and why should the government actually be helping them in terms of incentives, in terms of finances. So that's an important one. But let me bring in Dr. Saklani into the discussion first and get his views on a host of recommendations, observations made by the parliamentary panel. So incidentally, some of these recommendations have also been made in the NEP 2020. Dr. Saklani, what, according to you, is the most important takeaway that promises to bring about the much needed, much overdue reforms in the higher education sector in the country?
If you go by the NEP 2020, talking about the reforms in higher education or the education as a whole, then restructuring the whole system is very important. 5+3+3+4. That is an important component that we have changed it. And then there are different aspects. We are making different universities, research universities. They will be separately doing research. And then the teaching universities. This differentiation is also very good, because I think that if we are mixing the teaching and research, then we have to provide the sufficient resources to the universities. I see as of now, there are single teachers in the degree colleges or PG colleges, and the universities are running out of the faculty. Then the API score, this time, the people are publishing bogus papers for the API score just only. So research has to be done in that way, and this NEP speaks high about that. If we are making the universities of good universities, top-ranking universities, then we have to focus on all aspects which NEP speaks for. That's why I consider that these changes are very important, significant changes, which will bring higher education into the proper domain of the research and teaching also. That is one important. And then another important aspect which Professor Sharma raised is that of University Grant Commission and reconstituting that into HECI, Higher Education Service Commission of India. So that is important, and all these regulators have been destroying and not doing well for the education system as a whole. So these regulators should be controlled first of all, and that NEP speaks for, because we have realized that this regulation system was not good. So regulatory system must be improved and changed, and this is being done by the NEP. So the execution requires much more attention.
Okay. Professor
Policies always
Saklani, you
Yes.
spoke about malpractices, especially in teachers' recruitment, but the parliamentary panel talks about some much-needed reforms, and the most important one being reducing the duration of recruitment. So isn't that contrary to what you're suggesting? Isn't that going to lead to more malpractices?
No, not at all, not at all. Malpractices come when the practices are not being adopted.
Okay.
If they are giving us the fair calendar, that calendar is very good. And if we recruit the teachers in time, then our research and our teaching will not suffer. And then when we go by the national framework, we find that most of the colleges and universities are not getting good rank in NAC and also NIRF, because teachers are not being recruited, and we have adopted a practice of outsourcing the teachers, guest faculty. This sort of discrimination will be done away with when we are recruiting the teachers fairly and in a given time of space.
Okay.
That is important.
Okay.
Yes.
Professor Sharma, coming back to you, a related question on evaluation of teachers. The panel talks about how universities should, on an experimental basis, start evaluation of their teachers through peers and students. How significant do you think is it going to be in ensuring accountability and performance of the faculty members?
I think Professor Saklani has made a very relevant point that the National Education Policy intends to reform the teacher recruitment as well as assessment process. Read very carefully, the policy says we will have a tenure track teacher procedure now, where we will have tenure track teachers. This was not practiced here. This has been in practice in European and American universities. They have done very well with it. The assessment of teacher is important. But what we do in a country like India is we leave that to administrators. Teaching and assessment for teaching capabilities, aptitude is important. And this policy intends to introduce that idea into it. Plus, I believe the policy slowly wants to go towards excellence in teaching and excellence of teachers. There is one salary structure across the country, whether one is a professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University or in a university at Supal, both get the same salary, whereas look at the quality. It's a vast difference. We need to introduce that as well. But I don't accept that academic performance indicator designed and developed by the University Grants Commission was a good exercise. It has ruined the honesty of the teachers and institutions. Mm-hmm. Teachers, what Professor Saklani said, I completely agree with it. This pushed teachers into making fake publications and getting API points. That must be withdrawn immediately. A new format, which is quality driven. We compromise with quality every time. We bring in a big idea and then compromise it when it is at the implementation. I am very, very scared that you have said that you will have board of governors for institutions and the institution will govern themselves. Finally, what would happen that nobody who are not even, anybody in academia will start managing institution, which will be very, very damaging for the institution. A great idea into the policy, but if not implemented well, will result into catastrophic impact.
Absolutely.
I will give you one idea.
I think the key lies in implementation, and what are the hurdles that we face in effective implementation is something that I'll come back to you, Dr. Sharma. In the meanwhile, let me go across to Dr. Bajaj first. So, your remark to two quick points made by both Major Kumar and Professor Sharma on, number one, the funding of private universities, so they are supposed to be self-financed. And the second point that Major Kumar made, that private universities in terms of coverage, they do not match with the public universities, because they cover the far-flung areas. Your response?
So I would like to say a few things. Look at the data the committee has recommended. 9,000 institutions out of 50,000 institutions have been accredited so far. The second data is 80% institutions are only private and 20% are government. Look at, I would say, the one parameter which has also been considered is research contribution. Research contribution, the data for the IITs was given collectively, how many patents have been filed and so on. But look at the research, if research accomplishment also would have been looked into for the private, I would say 80% private institution, 9,000 only institutions accredited by NAC and NBA, and look at the private numbers in that. The third, research contribution of the private institutions. This all would lead to, when and NIRF ranking as well, top 100, top 200 universities or institutions in the country, looking at all this, and when we want the institutions to be at par with Harvard, MIT, and Stanford, and there is no model for private, and then we need to support. We are talking about higher educational reforms and bringing institutions at par with world-class institutions, then we need to support the private institution equally. Ranking is set, then support has to be the same. Yeah, they are self-financed, but it is a time about grants. It is a time about recognizing how, look at the data which is also being added in the report about patents. So how many patents have been filed and how many patents have been granted, that also public and private. So if outcome is expected to be same, then input has to be in rational. I didn't say
Okay. So what you are saying, Dr. Bajaj, merits attention, but at the same time, the panel also suggests that funding must be encouraged through donations by individuals, alumni, and institutions, which will be 100% tax deductible. So what are the efforts that the private institutions are making towards raising funding by this mechanism?
So I guess a lot of attention nowadays has been paid towards the alumni contribution, alumni revamping. Even UGC has recommended many of the companies and then support agencies who would track your alumni. They will bring them into mainstream. They would be enhancing and strengthening your system. So yes, there is a need wherein your stakeholders have equal stake and equal say in the institution, and they would be supporting. Industry funding, industry collaboration, and alumni both have been recommended in the latest recommendation, and that is very correct. In addition to that, one point which we have to be considered is one nation, one data. That has been mentioned by this committee, supported again NEP, and which has to be there, which would bring a lot of, gaps would be filled with this if this is really being implemented.
Okay, Professor Sharma, taking on that important point of the academia-industry partnership that Dr. Bajaj made, what is the current state of the partnership? And when the parliamentary panel talks about taking measures to strengthen them further, how can this be done? How can we strengthen industry-academia partnership to effectively implement the reforms in higher education that we've been talking about?
Let me start by making a very sweeping comment. The future of education is private education. Very correctly, Professor Bajaj is mentioning that it has expanded and it has become so strong. Strong because it controls politics, because the private institutions belong to them who are powerful, who are rich. But that doesn't mean that the state should completely support them because they have become powerful. Where would the poor children go? We are playing with public institutions. Nobody is our vice chancellors. Those who don't deserve our vice chancellors, they have absolutely no care for the university because they are there not because of their merit, but because they have somebody in the government or powerful circles. You will have to really think over what will happen to public universities. I completely agree with Harsh Kumar that we need to support public universities because they serve the poor, the less privileged, the people from the rural areas. But I'm also in agreement with Professor Bajaj that they are doing good work because they have the money, they have the resources, they have the connections to do that. I believe the longer we neglect this public-private partnership and the treatment to private universities, we are damaging the nation. Prime Minister himself said that we can no longer look at the private institutions and private sector as a pariah. We have to take them on board. We will have to take private universities on board. MIT is a private university. Harvard is a private university. The Ivy Leagues, but then they have a history. Our nation will also have a similar history. Look at private university. I wouldn't name them. They are the best in the sector. Why? Because they are doing good work and they care about academia. Our public universities don't care because we select the chief executive not because they deserve to be there, but because they have connections. We will have to do away with it, and somebody has to bell the cat. And I want to do that today, because your public universities are not performing. Then you cannot expect and demand parity with private universities. What I would say is that it is not just an issue of financing of private institution, it's an issue of governance, regulatory framework, and the mechanism to run these universities. We must make them autonomous and performance based. We have not counted performance as one of the criterion for progress in or elevation in academia. We must start doing that.
Absolutely.
Higher
Performance and quality are two
education.
focus areas that the panel also talks about, that the NEP 2020 focuses on. And Professor Saklani, let me come to you, because there is so much that the panel has spoken about and interesting aspects that we would like to discuss on the program. One of them happens to be about humanities in technology institutions. It says the experiment of providing courses in humanities in technology institutions should be reviewed. Now, according to you, how significant, how feasible, how productive is this going to be if it is implemented?
Yes, I think this will be most productive, because, you know, the ethics and values we are losing nowadays, and the technocrats and bureaucrats, all the technocrats are becoming bureaucrats. I could point out a finding of the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy of Administration, which pointed out that the technocrats do not know the terminology of administration. Social sciences and humanities are the basis for ruling the country. If the technocrats are being produced for joining these services, then you can compare. So if the technocrats and these institutions are adopting the humanities and liberal sciences, then it will bring some human values and ethics there also. As some of the top universities are adopting these values, then they are going in a better way. So I think that this should be adopted, this should be practiced, but then we should not neglect the universities which are already providing the liberal sciences and social sciences. What will be of these universities? It should not be at the cost of those universities who are traditionally providing this type of education. And proper training and guidance should be given to technocrats. They can't handle the humanities and social sciences in a way they are handling the technology. Because technology and tradition, these are very important two aspects. If we are going after the technology, we should have a judicious blending of the tradition also. Without tradition and without practices and without ethics, no society can progress. So basics should be there. If this is done in the technical institutions, then it is a welcome step. But it should not be at the cost of our tradition.
Okay, so that's a welcome step, Dr. Bajaj. But, regional languages being introduced in technical education, how welcome a move is that? What are the kind of sweeping changes that it is going to bring about in the area of technical education?
I would say, last time also I have said, this is a very welcome move. We are reaching to the locals. I would call it, it's a very welcome stage. All leading countries, if we look across the globe, they have developed because they were teaching into, their foundation was in the local language. So having technical language, I have seen people from Japan and other Korean countries wherein they are reading, everything is, they are reading in English, but then the translation is in their mother tongue. So that's a very welcome. Only challenge is when we are talking about lot of digitization, do we have sufficient tools for, say, checking plagiarism? Do we have sufficient tools for open source softwares? Do we have sufficient tools for sufficient books in the local languages? That would be developing, but the stage is really, it's a very, very welcome stage wherein AICTE has started a BTech program in regional languages. It's a very, really welcome stage.
Okay, so that having been said, I'll take one final question from Professor Sharma on the challenges. We've discussed how implementation is the key to every reform policy that we talk about. And because this is going to change the face of education in our country, as you've all reaffirmed, what are going to be the hurdles, the roadblocks in effective implementation of these policies?
I will echo what Professor Saklani said, that it's a great policy, and even the parliamentary committee report is a great report. But the challenge would be that those who are at the helm of affairs, those who are made responsible for implementing it, must know the domain. Those normally in our country implement the recommendations who are administrators. If you don't understand media, how can you be the chief executive of Rajya Sabha TV or the editor of Times of India? You have to be a person of the domain. Similarly, those who have been in academia, understand academia, must be given the opportunity. Unfortunately, in our country, right from the beginning, in fact, right from Macaulay's time, those who are close to the government and close to the power circles, they manage academia and education. Till the time you are doing it at the national cost. Universities which we keep quoting from Finland, UK, US, they are all managed by academics. So what Professor Saklani said, that you need to understand the sector. You need to understand academia. You need to understand higher education. And
Absolutely.
That is why
so when we talk
755
about adapting global best practices, this is one thing that we have to keep in mind. So with that very, very important point that those who are implementing policies must have domain knowledge. I'll wind up the discussion. Thank you, Dr. Bajaj, Professor Saklani, and Dr. Sharma. We lost connection with Major Kumar, but thank you to all of you for joining us on the program today, sharing your thoughts, your views with us and our viewers. So that's it from us on this edition of Perspective. Thank you, viewers, to you as well for your time. See you again same time tomorrow now with a brand new topic and a different panel of experts. Until then, take care of yourselves and keep watching Sansad TV.